Story 1. It all started at my dad's funeral. I'm standing by his casket, numb and exhausted from grief, when a woman I've never seen before walks up to me. She's older, maybe in her 60s, wearing a long gray coat and a scarf that looks hand-knitted. I'm expecting her to offer condolences, but instead, she presses a folded piece of yellowed parchment into my hand. "This is for you," she says softly, her eyes locked on mine. "A prayer for closure. Write to him. He'll answer." I'm too polite, or maybe too drained, to refuse. I just nod, thank her, and slip the paper into my pocket, thinking it's some well-meaning gesture from a stranger. By the time I'm ready to leave, I've forgotten all about it. That night, after everyone's gone home and the house is quiet, I'm sitting on the edge of my bed and I remember the paper. I pull it out and unfold it. The symbols covering it aren't in any language I recognize. Swirling shapes and lines that look like they've been scratched with a shaky hand. In the middle, there's an empty space, like it's meant for writing. I'm not sure what makes me do it. Maybe grief makes people desperate, or maybe I just needed to feel like I'm doing something, anything, to stay connected to him. I grab a pen and write, "I miss you, Dad. Are you okay?" I fold the paper 3 times, just like the woman said, and slide it under my pillow. I feel stupid, but I've done worse things out of grief. Sleep comes eventually, restless and full of half-formed dreams. The next morning, I'm barely awake when I remember the paper. I pull it out and unfold it slowly, heart thudding in my chest. There's new writing below mine, sharp, uneven letters scrawled in black ink. "I hear you." I sit there, frozen. For a long time, I convinced myself I'm still dreaming, or maybe I'd somehow written it myself and forgotten, but I'm sure I didn't. The handwriting isn't mine. It's rough, jagged, like someone was struggling to control the pen. I'm not ready to believe it's real, but I'm also not ready to throw it away. That night, I write another message. "Is it really you, Dad?" The next morning, the reply is longer. "Yes, I'm here." It's stupid, I know. It's ridiculous. But for the first time in days, I feel hopeful, like maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. I start writing every night. The replies come every morning, always a little longer. I ask him questions only he would know, like the name of his first dog, Milo, or the color of the bike he got me for my 10th birthday, red. He answers every one of them correctly. I'm convinced it's him. But a week later, things change. One morning after I'd written, "Do you miss us too?" His reply reads, "It's cold here." I stare at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it's not as creepy as it sounds. Maybe he's just being poetic, but it's enough to make me hesitate that night. I'm sitting on my bed, the paper in front of me, debating whether to write something or not. In the end, I do. "Can I help you?" The next morning, his reply chills me to my core. "They see me now. I'm done." I fold the paper up and throw it in a drawer. No more. Whatever this is, it's gone too far. But that night, I can't sleep. I'm lying in bed, eyes wide open, thinking about those words. They see me now. Who sees him? Who's watching him? Is it other spirits? Something worse? Or am I just losing it completely? After hours of staring at the ceiling, I grab the paper. I'm angry. Angry at the paper. Angry at myself. Angry at my dad for leaving in the first place. I scrawl one last message. "Where are you?" The next morning, I'm too afraid to open it. But I have to. I've come too far. My hands are shaking as I unfold the paper. "Behind you." I'm laughing, but it's not real laughter. It's nervous, short, like I'm trying to convince myself it's a dumb joke. I'm sitting on the bed, staring at the words, grinning like an idiot. It's just a coincidence. It's nothing. Then I glance at the TV screen, which is off but reflecting the room. There's someone standing at the foot of my bed. I whip around so fast I nearly fall off the mattress, but there's no one there. My heart's pounding like a drum. I'm sweating. I'm checking every door, every window, every closet. I'm alone. Of course I'm alone. I'm done with the paper. I'm done with all of it. I take it outside and burn it in the backyard. I watch the flames eat it up until there's nothing left but ashes. I feel relief for the first time in days. That night, I sleep like a baby. But the next morning when I wake up, There's something on my nightstand, a small pile of ashes. I'm staring at it, breathless, and I'm not sure why until I see it. The ashes aren't just scattered. They've been arranged. They spell my name. I'm out of the house that same day. I'm not ashamed to say I'm terrified. I stay with my brother for a while. I don't tell him the full story because I know how it'll sound. Everything's fine for weeks. No ashes, no paper, no creepy figures. I started to believe it's over, and so I returned back. Then one night, a few days later, my brother calls me out of the blue. It's after midnight, and I'm half asleep. He's breathing hard like he's just woken up from a nightmare. "Hey," he says, his voice shaky. "I had a dream about Dad." I'm quiet, my throat tightening. "Yeah? What about him?" He was tapping on something, like the inside of a box, a coffin maybe. He kept whispering the same thing over and over. My brother's voice cracks. He said, Tell your brother I'm still here." The line goes dead silent, and so do I. I'm still waiting to feel safe again. Story 2. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghosts or any of that supernatural nonsense. But something happened to me that I can't explain. To this day, I still don't know if it was real or if my mind was just cracking under the weight of everything I'd been through. It all started a few months after my cousin Darius died. Darius lived alone in a crumbling old house on the edge of town. He wasn't the kind of guy who kept in touch often, so it wasn't until the neighbors complained about the smell that anyone realized he'd been dead for weeks. When the cops finally got inside, they found him slumped over in his living room chair, his body bloated, discolored, and crawling with maggots. They ruled it natural causes and closed the case. But I knew Darius. He was 33, healthy, and had no history of heart issues or anything like that. Something felt off, but I didn't have any proof, so I tried to push it out of my mind. Life went on, at least for a while. About a month after the case closed, things started happening in my apartment. The first sign was the smell. It was subtle at first, like something faintly sour, like milk that's just about to turn. I'd catch whiffs of it around 2 a.m. while watching TV or scrolling on my phone in bed. I figured maybe I'd left food out or forgot to take out the trash, but I'd search the whole place and find nothing. But then it got worse. It wasn't just a smell anymore. It was the smell. If you've never smelled a dead body, consider yourself lucky. It's this heavy, sickly sweetness that clings to your throat and makes you want to gag. Once you've smelled it, you'll never forget it. And somehow that exact smell was now in my home. I'd clean every corner of the apartment, scrubbed the floors, emptied every trash bin, washed the walls, but it didn't matter. The smell would disappear during the day, but always came back at night. Always at 2 a.m. sharp. One night, I'd had enough. I'd barely slept for days, jumping at every creak and shadow, convinced I'd finally lost it. So I decided to stay up all night just to see if I could catch whatever was causing it. I'm not proud of this, but I sat on my couch, baseball bat in hand, like I was waiting for a home invader. At exactly 2 a.m., the smell hit me. Hard, like something had died right next to me. I gagged, my eyes watering. Then I felt it, this awful crawling sensation on my hands. I looked down and saw maggots wriggling up from under my fingernails. I swear on everything, I'm not lying. They were squirming, pale little things pushing out from under my nails like they'd been growing there. I screamed, jumped off the couch, shaking my hands like a maniac. I ran to the sink, scrubbing them raw with soap and scalding hot water. But there was nothing there. No maggots, just my hands. My clean, normal hands. I'd almost convinced myself it was a hallucination. Stress, lack of sleep, trauma from everything with Darius. That's what I told myself. I'd almost believed it too. But then came the knocking. It was faint at first. Tap, tap, tap. Not at the door, at the wall, right behind my bed. I sat up, heart pounding, staring at that spot. I told myself it was a pipe, an old building creaking. You know, logical explanations. Then it got louder. Knock, knock, knock. Like someone was on the other side of the wall, knocking with their fists. "Let me in," a voice rasped. I'll never forget that voice. It was Darius' voice, but wrong. like his throat was full of water and his vocal cords were shredded. "Let me in." I froze. My breath hitched in my chest. Every hair on my body stood up. I'd heard Darius' voice 1,000 times in life, and I'm telling you, it was him. It was him. I knew it like I know my own name. Then the wall buckled. I'm not talking about a little creak. I mean it bowed inward, like something huge was pressing against it. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, and that's when I saw it. Him, or what was left of him. He was half in, half out of the wall. His head lolled to one side, his eyes, oh God, his eyes were just black, sunken pits. His jaw hung loose like it had unhinged, and from his open mouth something moved, crawling, writhing. Maggots spilled out like a waterfall. His skin, already swollen and purple in life, was worse now. It looked like wet paper that had been left to rot. He reached for me. He grabbed me. His fingers wrapped around my wrists, cold, wet, and too strong to be dead. His skin slipped under my grip like raw meat. I screamed louder than I'd ever screamed in my life. "Taste it! Taste what I tasted!" He bellowed, his face just inches from mine, his breath hot and putrid. Before I could pull away, he shoved his fingers into my mouth. I felt his taste, rancid meat. Then it was dirt, wet, cold dirt filling my mouth, my throat. I gagged, choking, trying to spit it out, but I could feel hair in my mouth. My vision blurred, my head spun, and I blacked out. When I woke up, I was alone. My bed was soaked with sweat. My hands ached like they'd been crushed in a vise, and my nails were split, bleeding at the edges. Dirt. There was dirt under my nails. That was when I called the cops and insisted they reopen Darius' case. They probably thought I'd lost it, but after enough pushing, they agreed. And wouldn't you know it? Turned out I was right. Darius hadn't died from natural causes at all. His co-worker, a man named Eddie, confessed to killing him. Turns out, Eddie had poisoned Darius with some kind of slow-acting toxin that paralyzed him. But that's not the worst part. He left him like that, alive but unable to move, while he slowly decayed in that chair for days before he died. They said I'd helped solve the case. I guess that's true, but no one solved what came into my house. No one solved that. I moved out the next day. I've told myself it was a nightmare, just stress and guilt twisting my brain. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still smell it. That smell, the stench of rot. Story 3. It started the day he died. I thought I'd seen the last of him, the man I'd spent my life with. I thought I could bury the grief, move on, and maybe in time heal. But I didn't, because he came back. At first it was just little things. I'd hear his footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, or see a shadow move in the corner of my eye. I figured it was my mind playing tricks on me, the loneliness making me hear and see things. But then one evening, I felt a cold breeze pass over me, like someone had opened a window that I hadn't remembered leaving ajar. I turned around, and there he was, standing in the doorway of the living room, staring at me with wide, empty eyes. It wasn't him, not the man I loved, not the person I'd kissed goodbye that day. This wasn't my husband. His skin was wrong, peeling in places as though it was coming off in strips, revealing raw, oozing flesh beneath. His eyes, once warm and brown, were bulging from their sockets, bloodshot and discolored. And his jaw, God, his jaw hung at an unnatural angle. The skin stretched too thin over the bone, as though it might fall off any moment. I gasped and stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Wow, what are you?" My voice trembled. He didn't respond. Instead, he just stood there, like a sickening statue waiting. I ran from the room, too terrified to even look behind me. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice, his low whisper, echoing through the house. "I'm still here." The next day I thought it was a nightmare. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that I was just grieving too much. But as the days went on, it became undeniable. He was there. Every night. Every time I turned around, I saw him. His skin was still peeling, still rotting, but now it was worse. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, like something dead had been left to rot in the heat. And then came the touch. I woke up one night to a coldness beside me. It wasn't the usual chill of the sheets or the air conditioner running. It was him. I could feel his wet, clammy body pressing against mine, his fingers cold as they brushed against my arm. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. His body, slick with some kind of foul moisture, pressed against my back, and I could feel his breath on my neck, a cold, wet gust that made my skin crawl. "Stop it," I whispered, trying to push him away, but he was too strong. His touch was burning now, like it was seeping into me. "Stop!" His voice came softly in my ear, like a lover's whisper, but full of something far darker. "You're starting to look like me." I couldn't breathe. I pulled away, but his cold, decaying arms tightened around me. His skin was coming off in pieces now, flakes of flesh falling onto the bed as he touched me. I could feel them, wet and sticky, sticking to my skin. I struggled to get away, but my body felt like lead. The last thing I heard before I passed out from fear was his raspy, decayed voice. "You'll see." When I woke up, I could feel it. The burn. The sting. I ran to the bathroom, tearing at my clothes, desperate to see what had happened. My heart stopped when I looked at my reflection. My skin was blistering. Red, angry blisters covered my arms, my chest, my neck. The skin on my face was starting to peel in patches, just like his had. It looked as though the rot from him had started to crawl into me, spreading like a disease, like something I couldn't stop. I called everyone I could think of: spiritual cleansers, psychics, mediums, even exorcists. I had them all come to the house one after another, each promising they could rid me of whatever demon had taken hold. They all tried different rituals, different prayers, different chants, but none of it worked. He was still there, haunting me in the dark corners of my mind, even if he wasn't physically present. His rotting form still lingered in my thoughts. Desperate, I moved. I packed up everything I could and left the house. I didn't want to stay there anymore. I couldn't. But no matter where I went, it followed. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, his voice whispering from the shadows, the feeling of his cold body next to me. And then it happened again. I woke up one morning, my face burning with the heat of my feverish body. I went to the mirror, my hands trembling. My face was falling apart. The skin was peeling off in chunks, like I was disintegrating from the inside out. My body was covered in the same sickening patches I had seen on him. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't escape. I went to every doctor, every dermatologist, looking for answers, but they couldn't help me. They all told me the same thing. My skin was deteriorating, but they didn't know why. The treatments didn't work. Nothing worked. Deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't the doctors who had failed me. It was me. It was the guilt, the betrayal I had buried deep in my chest. I had cheated on him. I had broken his trust, and now I was paying the price. The rot wasn't just on my skin. It was inside me, in my soul, and it was spreading. There was no escaping it. Now I don't know what will happen to me. I can feel it, the slow, inevitable decay. I'm becoming him, the man I once loved, now just a ghost, a punishment, a memory I can't shake. I keep wondering how long it will take before there's nothing left of me but this decaying shell. Will I fade into nothing? Will I become a rotting corpse like him? All I know is no matter how far I run, I'll never escape the punishment I deserve. And all that's left to wonder is, what will become of me? Story 4. It was the night after my Aunt Carol died that it all started. She had been sick for months. Cancer took away her strength, and the disease ate away at her body until she couldn't even recognize herself anymore. Her mouth, once full of sharp, confident teeth, was now just a hollowed-out shell, her gums raw and bleeding. The sickness left her frail and toothless, and when she passed, I thought I could finally breathe again. But that night I had the dream. In it, Aunt Carol was standing over me, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was smiling, or trying to. Her lips were stretched thin over the empty sockets where her teeth had once been. She reached down and grabbed my jaw, forcing my mouth open with surprising strength. I tried to scream, to pull away, but I couldn't move. She shoved her hand into my mouth and pushed something cold, sharp and jagged inside. I gagged, but the pressure of her hand held me in place. I could feel the disgusting, rotten teeth scraping against the inside of my mouth. Her breath was foul, like something dead. I struggled, my throat burning, but her grip was unrelenting. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the dream ended. I woke up gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Something felt wrong. My mouth felt strange, like it had been violated in some way. I reached up to touch my lips, but my fingers stopped when they brushed against something wet. I pulled them away, and they were covered in blood. I ran to the bathroom, my stomach turning. When I looked in the mirror, I froze. My gums were swollen and bleeding, and there, in the sink, was a tooth. My tooth. It was loose, hanging by a thin thread of gum. I spit it out, feeling my heart sink. What the hell was going on? At first, I thought it was just a freak accident, maybe from grinding my teeth in my sleep. But then it kept happening. Each night, a new tooth would loosen and fall out. But when I looked in the mirror the next morning, it wasn't just my teeth that were missing. Each gap was filled with something else. Something old, something jagged and broken. Teeth that didn't belong to me. They looked like the teeth my aunt had lost before she died. It wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. I knew what had happened. I knew why my aunt's decaying teeth were showing up in my mouth. I had stolen something from her while she was sick. Something precious. Something she'd held on to even as the cancer ravaged her body. It was a small antique locket, one she had worn around her neck for as long as I could remember. She'd kept it close, almost like a lifeline, something that connected her to the past. She had trusted me, and I had taken it. I'd hidden it away in my drawer, telling myself I would give it back when she was better. But she never got better, and I never told anyone about it. I kept it for myself because I thought it was the one thing I could take from her without her knowing. But I was wrong. The night after I had the dream, I woke up coughing, a deep, violent hack that rattled my chest. I clutched at my throat, gasping for air, when suddenly something heavy and hard shot out of my mouth. I doubled over in shock, feeling something metallic hit my hand. I looked down and saw a full set of teeth, a mix of sharp, yellowed molars and crooked incisors, all covered in a sickening film of saliva. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was choking on my own horror. I stumbled to the mirror, my hands shaking as I stared at my reflection. I didn't recognize myself. My gums were swollen, raw from the constant intrusion of foreign teeth. My face was pale, sickly, but it wasn't just my face I saw. It was hers. Aunt Carol's decayed grin stared back at me, her toothless mouth replaced with a twisted version of my own. The teeth in my mouth weren't mine anymore. They were hers, all of them, jagged and broken, and they felt like they were permanently lodged in my mouth, like they were trying to take over. I opened my mouth and my lips moved of their own accord, the words spilling out in a hoarse, unnatural voice. "You'll look just like me, dear." I slammed my mouth shut, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. The words had been spoken, and I knew deep down that I couldn't stop it. My aunt's curse had taken hold, and there was nothing I could do to reverse it. I don't have many teeth left now, just a few, barely hanging on, hanging by a thread. I can't even chew properly anymore. My gums are sore, constantly bleeding. No one can help me, not any number of dentists I see. It feels like I'm losing everything, like my aunt is slowly taking me over, piece by piece, tooth by tooth. And every night I cough up more teeth, more reminders of what I did. I don't know how much longer I can go on like this, living with the weight of my guilt and the creeping horror that my aunt's decay will become my own. All I know is that every time I look in the mirror, I see her grin, and I hear her voice in my head, reminding me of what I took and how it will never ever be returned. Story 5. The night after my mother's funeral, I couldn't sleep. It had been a long, grueling battle watching her fade away, piece by piece, to that damn disease. The cancer had eaten her alive, and there was nothing left of her but a fragile shell. I'd spent the last few months caring for her, staying by her side, feeding her, cleaning her up, doing everything I could to ease her pain. But in the end, it wasn't enough. The funeral had been a blur. A lot of people came, said their goodbyes, and told me how sorry they were. But no one truly knew what it was like to watch someone you love so much wither away until there was nothing left of them but bones and skin. That night, I was sitting in the living room of the house we'd shared for so many years, the place I'd grown up in. It was empty now. She was gone. The silence in the house felt like it was choking me. I tried to watch TV, but my mind kept drifting back to the days I spent with her. Her quiet, labored breathing, the way she looked at me with those sunken eyes, always so full of fear. I didn't expect to hear anything, but then I did. It started as a soft sound, like the creak of a floorboard, followed by a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, the wind, or maybe even my own tired mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. A voice, a hoarse, guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. "Son!" I froze, my blood ran cold. It couldn't be her. She was gone. She was dead. There was no way she could still be here, calling me. But the voice came again, louder this time. "Son, come here." I stood up, my legs trembling, and made my way toward the kitchen, though every step felt like I was walking into a nightmare. I reached the doorway and hesitated for a moment, my heart thudding in my chest. There, at the dining table, was a figure. It was my mother, or at least it looked like her. She was sitting there, her body slumped in the chair, her head hanging at an unnatural angle to the side, her eyes hollow, dark pools that seemed to stare through me. Her lips were pulled back in a wide, sickening grin, the kind you'd expect from a corpse, not someone alive. The sight of her made my stomach churn, a lump forming in my throat as I tried to steady my breath. "Mom?" I whispered, barely able to speak. What's going on?" But her head twitched, her eyes snapping to mine. And then she spoke, her voice scraping out from her throat in a way that didn't sound human. "I'm starving, son," she rasped, her grin widening unnaturally. "You never fed me." I stepped back, the blood draining from my face as my heart raced. This wasn't her. This wasn't my mother. This thing wasn't right. Before I could react, her face contorted in a way that made my stomach twist. Her grin turned into something monstrous, her eyes burning with rage. The smile stretched further, as though her face couldn't hold the fury inside it. And then she moved. It happened too fast for me to process. 1 second she was sitting at the table, the next she was on her feet, charging toward me with an unnatural speed, her body jerking and twitching with each step. I barely had time to raise my arms in defense before she grabbed me by the throat with hands that felt like they belonged to something inhuman. Her fingers dug into my skin, cold and unyielding. She was stronger than I ever remembered her being, stronger than anyone should be. Her grip tightened, and I gasped for air, my vision blurring as I tried to pull her off, but it was no use. Her face was inches from mine now, that twisted grin still stretched wide, her eyes glowing with something dark, something hungry. I could barely make out the words as they escaped her lips in a chilling whisper. "You never fed me, never cared for me. I'm starving, son. You won't get away from me." I struggled, my hands clawing at her wrist, but it was like trying to move a brick wall. I couldn't breathe. My vision was fading. The only thing I could focus on was her face, that grin and the suffocating weight of her hands around my neck. Just when I thought I couldn't fight anymore, I felt her grip loosen slightly. Whether it was because she was satisfied with her rage or because I had lost all fight left in me, I didn't know. But I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. I looked up, expecting to see her, still looming over me, ready to finish what she started. But she wasn't there. The room was silent. The kitchen was empty. I scrambled to my feet, dizzy and disoriented. I rushed back into the living room, my mind reeling with what had just happened. It couldn't have been real. It couldn't have been her. She was dead. She had to be. But when I checked my neck in the mirror the next morning, I froze. There on my skin were deep, unmistakable bruises. 4 finger-shaped marks, still dark purple, still raw. I stared at them for a long time, the terror setting in, the realization creeping over me. Whatever that was last night, it wasn't just a nightmare. It was real. And my mother, or whatever had become of her, was still here, still angry, still hungry. The next few nights were worse. The whispers started again, always in the dark, always from the kitchen. And every time I could feel her presence, that terrible, oppressive weight. I could hear her voice calling to me, begging for something, or perhaps demanding something I could never give. The house is empty now, and I feel the silence closing in around me. I haven't been able to sleep, not since that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, makes me wonder if she's coming back. But the worst part is knowing she'll never leave me, because now I can feel her every time I close my eyes, her fingers tightening around my neck, her voice echoing in my ears. And I know that no matter how much I try to run, no matter how much I try to forget, she'll always be there, starving, waiting,